Hello, everyone. I am Christian Day, and I am the co-host of WitchCon, and I'm very, very excited to have one of my dearest friends, who I've known for a very long time, Laurie Cabot, who is the official Witch of Salem. Hello, Laurie.
Hi, Don. I love you. And
Love
you know
you
something? He's a master of witchcraft. And most people don't even realize that.
Well, I appreciate it. You have always inspired me. You know, I've always felt, they did an article about me in 2013 in the Boston Globe, and I brought them down to see you. And when they put the article out, they basically said I was a Laurie Cabot fanboy because it was the only time I was quiet. Because you have inspired generations of witches around the world.
I hope so. I hope we both have. It's very important because humankind is kind of lost right now. And they don't actually know that magic is real and can do good things. Our way of life, you don't have to harm anyone. And you don't have to harm an enemy even. You don't have to have a war because our magic can neutralize their ability to harm people, and we can put a protection shield. So we're, I think, the only group in religious ideas that doesn't do harm at all. And here we are known for devil worship and all kinds of terrible things, which are not true. And grateful now that a lot of the history, our history is being told and written about now. And I think that's what's important, that people understand how their brain works. It is a science. It's a wonderful mechanism if you use it correctly. And we wouldn't have these wars in Gaza, and it's primitive, isn't it?
Well, so much of the violence is driven by ideology and religion and thought of extreme rightness, you know, and everybody has to be
perfect and they're the best. We know better.
So I'm curious, you know, because certainly you've inspired me. I mean,
I know.
But what inspired you? What brought you to all of this?
It started very early in grammar school when, you know, in grammar school you study a place for like a week or 4 days. Next week it's somewhere else. And we had Salem. And Salem, you know, it talks so much about what is wrong. It's nothing about witchcraft, really. They don't know how to define it. But my mother happened to know a little about it, and I'm still trying to figure out why and how. And she said, well, they're not all bad witches. She says, just like people, there are good people and not good people. And the witches do a lot of healing, and she told me about herbalism, and etc. And so that stuck with me. Then I went through this period of time when all my little friends were Catholics. Okay. And my mother and father didn't push any religion at all towards me. I mean, I knew about Christianity. I knew the stories of Jesus and all that sort of thing. But we didn't really, it wasn't important, really. But I'm here, I'm playing and having fun with all my friends, and most of them were Catholics. And so one little girl said, why don't you come with me to catechism? I don't know, what do they call it?
Communion?
No, it's where they go and they teach you about religion in the afternoons. Never mind.
Might be catechism. I don't know. I made my communion. That was as far as I went. And I was
I didn't even
15,
do that.
You know.
And anyway, I decided I wanted to be a nun all of a sudden. And my mother said,
we haven't gone far off.
Oh, my mother almost fainted when I told her. And anyway, I had a meeting with one of the priests in the church. And I told him that I wanted to be a nun. And he looked at me, he says, you know, you're going to get credit for anything you do. If it's bad, you'll get credit for that. And if it's good, you'll get great credit for that. And you do not have to be a nun to live that way. And I went, that stuck with me. And it's a witch law, really, isn't it? I don't know where he came from, but he was well studied. And he's the one that really catapulted all that knowledge that my mom gave me. And it just stuck with me. And as I got older and older, and had quite a few magic things happen, a lot. And then I started studying alpha level, the brain, and how it works, and that it was real. And I thought, this has got to be told. People need this. Every single person needs to use their brain in a more perfect way. Without emotion doesn't get us very far. It can catapult you to do good things if you're anxious too much, but it also can be damaging, and you need to control that. And
you're better at that than me.
Yes, and I think it's important. But yes, I think now science has caught up with us. Science says that quantum entanglement says that unseen light can carry information and pictures and everything to a destination, and it can come back. So when we do psychic work, that's what that is. You're learning how to use your mind, not just your brain, and how to send light. Light. We're made of light.
Very few witches today talk about the science or that this can be a reality. It's often couched in very religious terms or spiritual. It's all very out there and not to be understood. So you've come at this from such a different direction that was so powerful for me. I took Witchcraft 1 in 1990, and not only did I do really well in those health cases, but everyone in that class did at least 75% accuracy just from all walks of life. And it really was life-changing for me to understand that this was something tangible and real and not just spiritual in some out there way.
Yeah.
I mean, how did you really come to that? Because it's so different than what you see.
I was just interested, first of all, in astrology and the light of the planets. If it has color or not and what it does to us. Why do we do astrology? And that started off. And then I started learning about alpha level and the brain and how that works and how powerful it is just to go into an alpha state. You go into alpha every night when you sleep, but controlling it is a different thing. And I learned that, and I thought, why doesn't everyone know this? It's not being taught. No one's saying this is what you can do. And I've had, like I said, many magical moments in my life. So that brought it more forward. And
even knowledge isn't always enough. I mean, we all know if you move more and eat less, you're going to lose weight. And here I am still struggling on. You know what I mean? We all know, sometimes even the knowledge. I've seen people that, when I went forth from your class, even when we drifted apart, I continued to use those techniques. I've never stopped. But then you see these other people, they take Witchcraft 1 or they take psychic development somewhere, and they learn these things and they empower themselves. But then they immediately stop relying on it as a tangible tool. It's almost as though they
had an experience and that's it. Yeah.
Yeah, it becomes just a one-time thing and not, to me, psychic ability and magic are constant without them,
Well, as a for instance, in my family on both sides, no one has lived past 60 or 65. I'm the only one that I know of, and we've done a little research, and they're all were gone quickly. And that's very young, to pass. And I'm 91 and about to turn 92. And I'm so surprised And I have no idea, I have no idea how long I'll be here or what I'm
You'll
hoping.
outlive us all.
I don't want to be old and decrepit and
People say that at about 60, about 90, and here you are, not decrepit. So I think it's, I'm going to tell a little story because this is kind of funny to me. When you were 85, we were on the phone.
Okay.
And you had just done a back-to-back Witchcraft 1 and 2 class.
All right.
And they're worth every penny. What are they, 500?
Mm-hmm.
Worth every penny. And at the time, I think you were having a moment, and you said to me, well, I don't know, I feel like I'm kind of forgotten. And I snickered, and I said, when I'm 85, if I'm still alive, I hope someone comes to visit me at the nursing home to talk to me about things that happened 30 years ago and that I don't have to use the bedpan while they're there. You, on the other hand, and still at 91, selling out these back-to-back witchcraft classes to people from all over the world.
Oh,
and I send people. There were at least one person in the last one, Irving, that I sent.
yes,
and
very
I
nice
still
man.
send people because, if there was one thing that I would want people to know about me, it's the same thing that I'd want people to know about you. They often see us in the media where the media will edit us down and sort of take snippets, and it's all very talking point-esque, and so you're getting a very filtered version.
Yes.
And so they will think, oh, are these people theatrical? Are they simply there for, whatever? But here's what I know. I know if I come to this house at 2 a.m. and knock on the door, you're at 91. You're going to have the eyes, the face, the hair. This is who you are. Yeah. And, it's so fundamental to your being. How did you come to this place where you knew it had to be all or nothing?
I'm not maybe over emotional. I don't know. And I liked the idea of maybe being an actor or a dancer when I was younger. I thought, oh, God, that would be so much fun, be on stage. And I think that's partly, I did some work on stage. And I think I learned how to speak to an audience. I learned how to present myself a little bit. Very small. I didn't do anything big. And I applied it when I started studying Alpha and witchcraft and looking at our history, which is amazing and beautiful, and trying to understand why people, were programmed to think it's evil and we're bad, and we've never heard of a devil. It's a Christian God. It's not our. We don't really worship. We don't worship our ancestors. Those are the gods and goddesses that we call that are really our ancestors. And so we honor them and we learn from them, from the other world. So I don't know, I was driven because I just felt bad for humankind that, they have this talent or this way of having a better life and to heal themselves and help others and to produce what they want to be. And a world that we all want, it can be done in this way. And I thought, well, maybe I can get a little message out there and see what people think about it.
Even I own khaki. When I went to Egypt, I bought a whole wardrobe of browns and khakis because I was going to this country I wasn't so sure about. And so I abandoned
the black.
All of this. You never, what motivated you to say, okay, I have to do this. I'm always going to look like this. I'm always going to be this.
In a black robe. I know, and the Egyptian makeup, that's part of it. And because I'm 85% British, and everyone that is British to that extent has Egyptian DNA. And somehow that kept coming up even when I was a child. And I started very early trying to outline my eyes, like the Eye of Horus or whatever, or all the the pictures of Cleopatra and all. So I don't know. I thought I I thought, well, how are they going to find a witch if you're not dressed in traditional clothing? And this is our tradition. And black, the color black, it takes all colors to create black. So you're absorbing all the rainbow, and that brings information into your body. So it's also a science, it's also something that is traditional. And I thought, well, how are they going to find me how do you find a nun now? They're all in dungarees and sweatshirts.
Well, there's a line in the book, God, I forget which one it is, but Terry Pratchett's Weird Sisters about the three witches, and one of them, Granny Weatherwax, says, what's the point of being a witch if nobody can tell? Every October, my friend Byron Ballard, who's presenting at WitchCon here, and wonderful Appalachian witch, but every October she does this post. I always have mixed feelings about it. I want you to post what you look like as a witch, just you and every day, and what you look, and of course there's dozens of people sharing it and reposting it, and 90% of them, probably most of them, are just looking like normal everyday people. And I always sort of feel, well, a lot of us do look like normal everyday people, but I always want to sort of, when I do it, I try to really put, well, this is my everyday.
Yes.
I don't own anything in my closet up in Salem that isn't some shade of black. I have a couple purples and reds, but
I know it's hard to find your clothes.
It's I can only shop in London, in New York.
Yes.
Because the fit models of this shirt, for example, this is a 4 extra large. I'm not a 4 extra large, but in this particular brand. So, this is who I am. This is the inner witch. It's not a robe, but it comes out in this palette.
Because you're using our tradition that black absorbs the rainbow. And we understand that light carries information. It helps you to be smarter. It helps you to be more psychic if you wear all black.
And other colors you wear, red might help you project the energy of Mars. White helps us send energy. So there are magics in other colors. One of the things I've really tried to avoid, and you've inspired this in many ways, and I've researched it also, when you look at tribal healers, magical people, not only in images of ancient cultures, but in tribal cultures today, that magical person looks different. They don't look like everyone else. There is something to be said for shifting. It's like when we do the dumb supper in October in Salem, the silverware is all on the wrong side and dessert is served first because you're screwing with people's minds, trying to shift them into a different consciousness. And so when a nun walks around, they are shifting the consciousness. It's like RuPaul's Drag Race. When you see a drag queen, there's a personality that not only reflects to the people watching them, but having done drag maybe 3 times, I think, it does bring out pieces of your real personality that don't always live at the surface.
Yes, absolutely.
So you doing this every day keeps you in that. You're never going to devolve. Well, not that you ever would, but hey, everybody, it just, it keeps it.
I live what I teach, and, when I'm cooking, I'm still wearing black robe or black clothing. I always
keeps it clean.
Long clothing, and I like that. And, if I'm pushing the vacuum cleaner, this is why I wear this, because I'm a witch.
But you've got those trains to the vacuums, You could never get a Roomba. The thing would be chasing you around the room.
I have to be careful that my robe isn't sucked up into it.
Especially with those new ones that go on their own, the ones that crawl around the floor.
We have one.
Oh, by the way. Careful. So, Salem.
Yes. Oh.
I think you are intrinsically identified with the city. And in my own work in this city, trying to be accepted by the powers that be, I think I grew to understand you better than I ever had. You know, you're one of the only people that I can pick up the phone and call, along with Maxine Sanders and
Love
Penny.
Maxine.
And, you know, there's not many people that I can call and say, this is what I go through. And then you can all say, shut up, Christian, and just tune it out, you know. But it's hard because there aren't a lot of people, you know, there are a lot of public witches.
Mm-hmm.
But they're public to the pagan or, you know, Wicca, a sort of witch world. But we're public in a different, you know, we're like known, not on your level, but I'm known in the
around the world.
You know, these witches. And it puts you in this, like, was it hard to step out into that? Because now you've become this target.
I didn't realize I was stepping into that. I had no idea that Oprah would want me on her show. I didn't get that, you know, and I knew that my makeup was extreme. It's always been, even in school when I was a kid. So I understood that. But I didn't realize that there was such an interest, number one, and there's a fear that's been programmed into people. And I haven't appeared fearful or angry or anything, because I'm not. You know, that's not what witchcraft is about. And people were not used to that. And I think that's what made it in Salem. I didn't want to move to Salem. I
don't always want to be in Salem.
Yeah, well, I had to move here, and it was in the 60s, and I had just divorced, and a friend of mine, she was just divorced with 2 children, and she said, why don't we take our children and go out in the suburbs instead of a city, because we were living in Boston at the time, and, you know, let them grow up with some trees and grass, you know, and so I said, oh, that would be fine. I said, I'll go, because she knew I was a witch. I told her, and you could tell. And I said, I will go anywhere with you, and we'll rent a house as long as it's not Salem, because I don't understand what they know. I'm not understanding how they would receive a real witch.
Well, none of it existed here.
Well, I didn't realize that either, you know. And so, of course, she comes to me with a newspaper all rolled up, and you could see the marks around, you know, the page where it's advertising homes and rentals, and she puts it to her chest and she says, promise me that you will go and see this house now.
And it was Chestnut Street, right?
Chestnut.
Just so people know, one of the top 10 architectural streets in the world.
Yeah,
never mind America, the world. Easily.
It's a beautiful street.
And
I'd never seen it.
I'm just going to turn this stupid notification thing off that I had no idea. Where is my do not disturb? Maybe if I turn it off on the phone. I'm going to turn it off on the phone.
Okay.
Then, do not disturb. Sorry, everybody. Yeah, it's now do not disturb. Go on.
Okay, well, and I thought if I had to move to Salem, I don't want to impose on the people of Salem. I don't know. You know,
I did.
Oh, that's okay. But at that time, you weren't doing that. And I thought, I don't want to disturb people's way of life in it. And,
I did.
And I don't know all about Salem. I knew a little, but not a lot. And she said, of course, it's Salem, Mass. And I said, oh, my God. And I just promised her that I'd go see the house. Well, we went to Chestnut Street in Salem. It's absolutely gorgeous, beautiful home. 3 stories high, you know, from the 1700s. And absolutely perfect. I thought, oh, who's going to know? Who's going to know that I'm a witch? So at that time, I wore black clothes sometimes as well as my robes. I switched back and forth, but mostly in the robes. And of course, I had a pentacle on my chest, and like you do. And I thought, well, who's going to really know? So we moved to Salem, and I didn't know it, but the then mayor was across the street from our house, and and people started to notice. It was quite interesting, and then one day my cat Molly Boo, because we end up with black cats because people think witches have to have black cats, but we usually have all kinds of cats. We love dogs and cats and animals. So, and I had Molly Boo was given to me, and I let her outside, and she went up a tree next to the house, all the way up, and couldn't come down. She was terrified. She'd put herself in a terrible place, and I didn't know what to do. And the bathroom on the third floor was right next to the tree, so there was a window. And I, would open the window and try to talk her down. My other cat would climb up the tree and kiss her face and then try to go backwards to show Molly Boo how to get down. And Molly Boo would not follow. And so I called the police department. I called the fire department. And they said, oh, you'll never see a cat skeleton in a tree. I thought, how rude, and we don't do that anymore. The fire department said, and the police, we don't do that. We don't go rescue animals anymore. And I thought, oh my goodness, where am I going to get help? So I'm, not like me at all, but I picked up the phone, called the Salem News, the newspaper. And I got somebody on the phone. It was late afternoon. And I told him the story that my cat was up the tree. And then all of a sudden, out of my mouth goes, I'm a witch, and that's my familiar. And I want him out of the tree now. And there was great silence on the phone. And he said, I'll call you back. And he hung up. And I thought, that's going to be the end. That's the end. Why did I say that? Well, I have Mercury in Aries, by the way. So that's what happens with my mouth. And anyway, all of a sudden,
that's all it took.
I'm in the house and I hear this rustle of people outside. I look out, there's a fire truck, there's a police car, there's police and firemen, and a little old man in a van. Well, he was one of those people who rescued animals. And I went out and they said, don't put a spell on us. And I thought, oh my God, I don't have time. That's not what I do. That's what I said. And so they said,
I just want my cat.
I just want Molly Boo. And the little old man came up to my third floor, went into the bathroom, lifted the window, and I had put a board from the window to the tree. It didn't do any good. He had a pole with a rope loop on the end of it. He stuck that pole out, put the rope around Molly Boo, brought her in and put her in my arms. It took about 2 minutes, and it was over. But in the meantime, I had told the world, I guess. I didn't know I'd told the world, but the newspaper, took pictures, and I didn't even know that. And we're in the newspaper, and that we live on Chestnut Street, and it's all that. And it got picked up by international news and went around the globe. That there's a real...
I don't know if they were back then, but I know that Salem News is tied into Associated Press, and they often will repeat what the Salem News does. If it's very interesting because I live in both New Orleans and Salem, and New Orleans is like a bubble. You don't hear about New Orleans unless there's a shooting, because people look at it as they're going to go to New Orleans, they're going to get drunk, and they're going to flash their breasts, and they're going to dance on the bar. So they don't really want people to know about New Orleans. It's people's dirty little travel secret. Where's Salem? I mean, I remember when we made the BBC News 15 years ago because there were two kids selling lemonade on Salem Common, and the sausage vendor, with a little truck called the police. And people are just so fascinated. But one thing that I think people watching may not know, that New Orleans has centuries of magical history.
Oh, yes.
The infamous wizard Aleister Crowley said...
And by the way, it's not witchcraft.
Right. But New Orleans had centuries where Aleister Crowley, the infamous magician, said, anybody who's anybody in the occult will end up in, New Orleans. Gerald Gardner was there. What a lot of people don't know, that including many witches who treat Salem as a sort of pilgrimage or a mecca to come home to their magical community, many don't know, it didn't exist before you. You created it. It did not exist.
Right.
So what you have a perspective on that people like me, I was born one town north in Beverly, but I wasn't involved. So someone coming into all of this now, whether it's here or New Orleans, they're coming into a path that's already been trod. But what was it like emerging? Now you're out, you're in the news. Salem's like, well, you got a real witch. We never had one of these before. How was that? The interaction with the powers that be and the local.
After high school, we lived in Boston, my mother and I, on Beacon Street, and I think that I started studying Alpha then, right out of high school. And I remember wanting to open a witch shop in Boston. And several people said, "Oh, you can't do that. Nobody will put up with that."
They don't have one now.
Well, I said, yes, you can. And of course, that washed away, and we moved out of Boston and out into the suburbs. And I still wanted to open a witch shop, and it didn't, just life got in the way. And then when I got to Salem, I thought, that's it. I'm not going to stay here on Chestnut Street. I want a shop now, because people don't know anything about witchcraft here. And they're saying all the wrong things. They don't have the proper definition of a witch, and they tie us with devils and all kinds of voodoo is not witchcraft. Every culture has their own magic, and it has a name, and it's nothing like witchcraft. It's just that it's psychic work of some kind or magic. So I did. I rented a place on Derby Street, and we lived upstairs, and I opened the shop. And, of course, you couldn't buy pentacles. There weren't any. And you couldn't get little bags of herbs that say, this is used for Venus and blah, blah, blah. Nothing like that. So I had to create labels and package some herbs and put them on a table.
Inspired me.
I had a local woman, Elizabeth Comarin, her name was. She used to do sterling silver wire work, and I got her to make pentacles and to sell. And I happen to have a gold pentacle like yours, so not as big, but I have a gold pentacle that you gave me. And at the time I had one. So anyway, I got the shop, and there I kept building up the inventory, because you couldn't get any of these. You couldn't get herbs. You couldn't get potions. You couldn't get symbols. There were no wholesale witch things anywhere,
Not that many now. There's more, but
there's more.
they're not all witch. I always, I don't.
They're not witches.
I don't like the word pagan, but I always say pagans don't produce. I often have to go outside of our community for the really high-end things because it's, to find somebody that can make a silver chalice or,
Right.
something like
I've
that.
done that, yeah.
You have to go outside of it. Something that I studied with you, or about you, that I think a lot of the shops in Salem over the years have gotten wrong. There was one store, I'm not going to name them, but they went out of business, and I remember trying to save her. And I said, put the meanings on all the herbs. And she said, my customers know the meanings of the herbs. And I still have to look most of them up. Even you've written books. I mean, I'm sure there's some you might have to look up.
And my herbs, I put them in little bottles and label them.
But make it accessible. You made it accessible so a regular person.
But they all look alike when they dry. They look like pots.
But you made it accessible. You
can't tell them.
I learned that from you, that if someone comes into... Salem had 1.2 million visitors in October alone. That was up from 800,000 to 1 million last year,
Yeah.
October alone. We used to get 133,000 in the whole year. And most of those people that, they did redo this study because they hated the results. But the first study that the tourism office, Destination Salem, that would love that I forgot this number, they did a focus group survey. And, of course, I said, why don't you ask, check all the reasons you chose Salem. And I insisted, add modern witch. And, of course, there was another witch on that committee, I won't name, that was very upset that I was commercializing her religion by asking the question. And I'm thinking, well, the Mormons would want to know who's coming to Salt Lake City for the Mormons. That's not an unsightly question.
No.
But 89% of those people surveyed said they were interested in the modern witch.
I remember that.
And that's not just witches. That's everybody. People come to this city wanting to understand a witch. And I feel like, I get, as bad as some of the right-wingy religious crazies hate us, sometimes the real extreme lefty atheist types don't like us either. And those are the types that always ask me in the media, why are there so many witches in Salem when there were no witches in 1692? Well, first of all, we don't know. It's probably...
No one knows.
We don't know. It's unlikely, but who knows what people dabbled in. But here's what we do know. The city of Salem is more associated with the word witch than any place else on earth. Mm-hmm. The witch trials are one of the most important historical events of civil liberties to understand scapegoating. So it's such an important historical story to tell, but every time you tell it, it reinforces negative perceptions of witches. Absolutely. Created in Europe and furthered by the Puritans. So there's no better place for witches to be. Mm-hmm. To say, that's not what a witch is. And I tell our staff, I never want people that work with us to think, I'm just a cash register person. Because that cash register person is going to talk to somebody that comes into that store. Yes. And they're going to be like, then they're going to, like ants taking food back to the nest. They're going to go back to Wichita. And they say, I met this witch, and she worked at Omen, and she was so nice to me, and she helped me make a mojo bag and bless a candle to help me find a new job. And then I found a new job. And now that person in Wichita tells their friends, I met this witch. Right. I never, ever devalue the importance of every representative in this city and the power they have. And it's why I came back. It's why I bought the house.
I know.
I had to because, it's like you've been doing this for so long.
Over 50 years.
And you're still doing it.
Yes.
And, I don't think I would dream of having that kind of legacy. I have a very differently. I'm the business guy.
Yeah, but you are doing that.
But but regardless of whether I could ever fill your shoes, the most important thing to me right now is that this city continue to represent the best of not only witchcraft, but how magic itself can empower the world. Mm-hmm. I often joke, my husband is a high priest of the New Orleans Coven, and he's helping the Salem Coven, and he's very religious and focused
Alexandrian,
on initiates. So I always like to joke, my husband's the Ayatollah and I'm the Lee Iacocca, because I am focused on a bigger, wider, I am Alexandrian, but I have this sort of, so many people are coming to this city to learn what magic is, and it can change the world.
Yes.
And how do we represent that? And that isn't a one-man job or one-woman job. It's a team effort. And so, without getting into a lot of detail, I have certainly seen some representations in this city that worried me. And I said, as Laurie might not be speaking out as much, and the people that are representing this, who's going to fill this vacuum of negativity, where this negativity can come in and associate us with Satanism or
that's
vampires.
It has nothing to do with us, but it seems to drag itself into Salem occasionally.
Well, it's like I try to be very, people ask me, well, you have a satanic temple in Salem. How do you feel about it? Well, as a civil libertarian, I support the freedom of every religion. And so I would never say, oh, they can't be here. But it does muddy the waters and make our work harder, because now we've got to come out and say, well, with all respect to these people.
We never knew a devil.
It doesn't exist.
Our ancestors, it's not what happened to the Celts. The no devils at all. And, we have no evil gods and goddesses of any kind from anywhere. And, and first of all, that the word Wicca there's no such thing as a religion called Wicca.
Oh, did you take heat for that? Because they did, when you did that on YouTube about, what was it, 15 years ago? They went nuts.
Well,
they didn't understand what you meant, though.
Well, I meant that actually the etymology says that Wicca and Wicca are a male witch and a female witch. It just means witches.
It goes further than that. So I asked my, because you'd always said the old word for witch was witch. And I said, well, I don't know if that's true, because you go in the dictionary and it says Wicca and Wicca. Yeah. Well, so I asked Levi Rowland, who runs the Pontchartrain Coven in New Orleans, a wonderful, brilliant priest. He co-hosts Covendom with Brian and Ellie. And he wrote The Art Cosmic. And by the way, I've got to get you a copy of this. He wrote a new book called Mother, which is all about the reemergence of the goddess. And I swear, if witchcraft, if the Catholic Church had always worshipped the goddess, he would be the Thomas Aquinas. This book is so theological. But I asked him, because he has a degree in linguistics, I said, Levi, is Anglo-Saxon a gendered language? And he said, like Spanish or French. And he said, yes, which Anglo-Saxon is also Old English. It's the same thing. So I said, well, the words, what they say in the dictionary is Wicca and Wicca are actually Witcha and Huiche. Yeah. Well, doesn't that mean that the A and the R are not really different words, but rather gender variants of the same word? He said, well, yeah. I said, so if you take the gender out from modern English, what are you left with? And he said, witch. He said, so that's when I called you. I said, no, you minx, you were always right. It's always the witch is the old word for witch. Now, part of the problem with Wicca, and it's interesting because a lot of Alexandria, the Gardnerians and initiates will use that word. I despise it more now as an initiate than I hated it before. Not as much as pagan, but I do like Wicca. And I have a lot of pagan friends. I have a lot of Wicca friends.
Well,
it's just not
part of Christianity.
It's not my word. It isn't me. It doesn't surround. But the word, so witch. So it really began, I think it was it Charles Cardell, someone that was in a witch war, quote unquote, with Gerald Gardner, called them the Wiccans. Gerald Gardner never referred to himself as Wiccan. Alex Sanders occasionally did, and Maxine explained that to me as, well, when we were in the pub and we didn't want anybody to know what we were talking about, we would say Wicca because then nobody would try to hone in on our conversation. Yeah. So it was, done in that way. But what what happened was you had, what Brian sometimes calls the death knell. When Scott Cunningham came out with Wicca for the Solitary Practitioner, he had all these books saying Wicca this and Wicca that, and a lot of the initiates, were using Wicca to differentiate, and along with the Cunningham set, both of these groups were using that to differentiate from all the different people calling themselves witches. Whereas I'm of the opinion that we should not cede that word to anyone. What I call the staying gang. That's the quote unquote traditional white, yes. They always spell it weird. It's like Witchcraft, or, they have more ways of spelling witch than the second wave feminists had of spelling woman. They had Woomban and the word, so that word has now been sort of co-opted by the sort of spooky set. And I don't mean spooky in the way I look. I mean like, how many frogs will I kill, and I carry a stang, and all these things that have nothing to do with it. And so they've tried to take that word. And the initiates, many of the witches out there, have given the word to them and said, here, you can say witch. I'll call myself Wiccan. But there is no such thing as a religion. I mean, yes, in the modern era, there are people that use it, but they're using
America. It's a colloquialism. It's just a made-up thing, and they accept it without education, and that's another issue, is the education in this country. But that's the reason that they just adopt it, and that must be real. They just hear it once and they say, I'm Wiccan.
We've mangled it. One of the things the Americans do that the British witches make fun of us for, and you've never done it, is the whole Lord and Lady.
Oh, God.
They have that already in England. It's called, you're a Lord or a Lady. Not, now the Americans do, it's interesting. In Raymond Buckland's last interview for The Wild Hunt, which only got 5 comments, so everyone it's a blog, and they were trying to sort of diminish it. And he was talking about the people that took over the Long Island tradition when he got divorced, and there's a Long Island line of Gardnerians. And Buckland said they did more damage to the craft with their changes than all the witch hunters in the Middle Ages combined. Because there is a thing here in America where we have to put our stamp on it, and I think it's good to... like you brought science, and people weren't doing that. It's good to bring a stamp to it if it improves it.
Right.
If you're bringing something to the table that actually empowers people. One of the things that you're bringing, and this is, given how long you've been at this, you've seen this from 2 very different places, many different places. When you started, you were an empowered woman in a time when feminism was just finding its feet.
Yes, absolutely.
So how did that make witchcraft different for you than, say, people today that have all their feminism talking points?
It doubled the struggle, didn't it? Because women weren't supposed to own businesses. They were still... I remember after my divorce, I had my children, and I wanted to move, and I called a woman about an apartment, and I said, I have 2 little girls, and I'd like this apartment. I'd like to look at it. Where's your husband? I said, I'm divorced. Oh, we can't rent to anyone without a husband.
You'd never see that today.
But that was in the early 60s.
So you weren't just a witch, but you were an empowered woman in a time where, we're still facing this today. The media really does not do enough to highlight, say, how women are treated in Iran or Afghanistan or places.
No, it's awful, yeah.
And now in America, women have lost the right to choose.
And see,
and you were at the beginning of all of that.
Yeah, my attitude is, you can't tell me, what to do any more than you can tell other people. You can, because I'm a woman.
And known you 35 years. Trust me, I'm aware.
Yes.
You are probably the strongest and most determined woman I've ever met. And that I
have to reinvent myself. I've had to do that many times in my life. So, you learn from your mistakes. Sometimes mistakes are a little on the good side because you learn how not to do it to get to your goal. You need another way, and sometimes we don't know how to manipulate our way to our goal, and that's one way of learning, doing what you shouldn't be doing. So I've definitely done that. But yes, my mother taught me all that. She was someone to reckon with as well. She just doesn't. She would never bow down in any way.
How do you feel about the shift against women that is emerging? After fighting for feminists, I remember when you were arrested for protesting the Seabrook nuclear power plant in the 80s. You have been, I don't think people realize how on the vanguard of feminist rights you've been since the early 70s. To see that backlash against women emerging.
Oh my goodness. Well, women have to do it. Women have to stand up for it. They can't just stay behind their little apron and cook and go after football with their kids. They have to voice it. They have to say, no, this is not going to happen, and change the law. And the law on abortion needs to be changed. It will be. They can. They don't own our body. We don't own men's bodies, and they certainly can't tell me what to do. And the trouble with that is they try to, and then they make laws. Well, you can always go outside the law to do these kind of things.
We're witches. We do try to follow the law, but
we have to just, but we know the law of give and take, and we are not going to create trouble and wars.
Well, weren't we herbalists back in the day when we might be the only people that someone could come to terminate a pregnancy or
Absolutely. Witches were in the abbeys and hiding sort of in religion, and they became the doctors, and then men took over what they were doing, and that's why there are so many male doctors, But they're not. We're catching up in that field anyway,
Well, I think your approach to science helps. That was something for me because I'm so left brain in many ways, and so I'm very analytical. And so when I can,
but that's good.
When I can wrap my head around, oh, this makes sense why we can be psychic, and this makes sense why a candle sends light. And
I had a Catholic priest in one of my classes, and he was a priest in Boston, one of the big churches. I've had scientists, males who come because they wanted to know what this science was. I've had scientists come. I would say, and someone that has got to deal with the brain, that they are interested in why we are doing this. And we've taught them. Some of them who are counselors and etc. don't know anything about alpha level or the different levels of the electricity in your brain. It's very important to understand that we have electricity in our bodies, and light does change things. And light from a planet, if you're born, that's where astrology comes in. Because if you're born at a specific time when the planets are aiming at you in the sky, you'll get more of that color light into your body because we absorb it every day anyway than any other. So it makes you have tendencies towards the information that comes from that planet.
Now, we talk about these things, like you have been tonight, and so much of it for people when they hear this, oh, well, that's all wonderful theory, but you've put so much of this into practical application. And I think my favorite example was in the April 1979 issue of National Geographic. And I'm going to put that on the screen when I do the editing, so they'll be seeing the picture. And where your coven was visited by Nathan Ben from the National Geographic. Tell us about that photo that they got.
Well, they wanted, to take pictures of us doing a magic circle, our ritual.
It's cultural.
Yeah. And so the spell we were casting, all the witches were in the circle, and they're photographing us from all angles. And the spell that we did was to bring the light of Jupiter, to allow the blue light of Jupiter, to allow people to understand that witchcraft is a science. That was the reason. So that would go into the book, hopefully. I was hoping they'd put all that in there. And then they took pictures during the ceremony. And then after, when we opened the circle, everybody lined up and they took a picture, like the whole group. And when the photographs came back, one of our priestesses in the beginning, while we were casting the spell, she had the chalice up and they took a picture of it, and blue light, royal blue light, came floating out of the cup. And it kept getting bigger and bigger. And then when we stepped back out of the circle, royal blue light went to every witch that was in that circle. And I've been teaching long before that the light from Jupiter is royal blue, and it's for expansion and wisdom, and it's a wonderful energy from that planet that helps you so much. And just recently, NASA created a camera. I don't know if it was 2015, I forget the exact date. They sent this camera out to Jupiter. They took pictures for the first time, never seen before, royal blue light coming out of the planet.
And you see that in the grimoires of the Key of Solomon, the idea of blue being associated. And it's like, how did we know?
Well, we knew.
Demonstrates that psychic ability.
Can you imagine? Yeah, and that proves something that we can use for the good. That's for certain.
And you said before that they've analyzed that photo, and they to this day haven't been able to figure out any alternative explanation.
No, they couldn't figure out how it happened. They did everything. They thought it might be the film. It might be the heat. They had no idea what.
And they still don't.
No, they never found out.
Well, on a more deeply serious side of it, to put yourself into this place as a public witch and psychic, people are going to come to you in the most serious moments. And you were on Unsolved Mysteries, and you used, it's a dark story, but it shows that what we do is important beyond simple. We're not a sideshow, we're not a novelty, we're an important function.
Absolutely.
And so you helped to locate a woman's remains of a murder victim, Martha Brailsford.
Yes. I happen to know her because she's, people in Salem knew her. She was an artist, very nice girl. And, all of a sudden they're looking for her, and they found her body, of course. And
didn't you lead them to her?
Well, they hadn't found her body yet. And they came to me and said, can you tell us what happened? And I told them what happened. And I said, her body is, in the water near Marblehead. And the island near her looks like a cat sleeping or something. And they found her there. Absolutely.
This cannot be understated in terms of the power that brings to the family of someone like this who need closure and need something to, to know that what is, we don't always want to find out the bad, we're always hoping to find them alive. but you also want that closure, and you were able to give that to these people. I mean, that can't be, the power of that can't be understated.
It's important. It's very important in our lives to have that kind of support and knowledge. And we have it. It's available to every single person. They have to learn how to do this. And they have to want to. I can't teach you. You have to learn. I can tell you how it works.
How, I always say that there were 3 pivotal things that made Salem what it is today. And they all happened around the same time, late 60s, early 70s.
Okay.
You coming to town, the Salem Witch Museum opening, and the show Bewitched filmed a number of episodes. And between those 3 things, it percolated into, we went from being, the history buff comes and learns about the witch trials to everybody and their mother wants to learn about the witch trial. Witches from all over the world coming to understand the magic and spirituality of a community you created. And of course, the whimsical side that things like Bewitched, it's certainly not.
It was a fun thing.
It's not real, but it's fun, and it's at least it's not negative. There's so many.
Pretty good.
I mean, the reason you were on Oprah was when the Witches of Eastwick came out. You founded the Witches League for Public Awareness, and you've always been a vocal. I mean, obviously, it's a fun movie, but I see the other side of it.
Yeah, it's very damaging to witches. Yeah.
How do we, how do you see that different? Like, are we still fighting that fight today?
Oh, absolutely. That perpetuated the devil thing, in big ways. And we, like I said, our people in our history never had a devil, didn't know what a devil was. And when the church came into play to gain their power over people who could do the things we do, that's when they started giving us this devil and saying we were doing the work of the devil and all these horrible things. It's sad. It's very sad that we've been put behind for thousands of years. We need to come forward, and the people need to know that witchcraft is a tool to enlightenment. It's a tool to knowledge. It's a tool to life, and that everyone can use this method. You don't have to be a witch to do it.
To this day, we still don't have, we've had all these reality shows about coupon clippers and everything. We've never had one that's centered on actual witchcraft practitioners.
Not at all.
And so people, for all the reality, quote unquote, not that very realistic anyway, but for all these reality shows, we're not showing our story. And so we're still interpreted through this lens of,
yes.
Whether they're there's certainly positive perspectives like practical magic and the good witch, but they're still so fantastical. They paint a picture that isn't really who we are.
Completely. And it's very damaging for people. But I'm happy now, some of the young people who are actually not studying the science, which they really should, they're all over the internet and everything, but they are standing up for it and not backing down and not accepting the devil. Very few witches would even use the word. It has nothing to do with our way of life.
Now, I know that neither of us really used the word pagan, but a lot of people have embraced it. And there was an interesting story over the last couple of weeks. A rabbi named Wolpe had published this article about the return of pagans or whatever it was. And he was basically talking about how Trump and the fascist right are reclaiming the ancient ideals of pagans. And he really wasn't thinking of modern witches or pagans. But in the process of this article, he really kind of downed magic, reverence for nature and the world around us in favor of, a higher power of God, and that without this sort of monotheistic God, were lost in the woods. And, and a lot of pagans and witches were insulted by this, even though he wasn't really, he was trying to compare the fascists and the Trumpies and the this and the that to these, ancient pagans. But what those ancient pagans believed often was what we believe, magic and the power to change the world from your own thought. And so someone from Cherry Hill Seminary, a pagan, I guess, tried to reach out to him, and he said, I don't want to talk, I wasn't talking about you. And I felt what a lost opportunity that these modern religious leaders still don't want to know who we are.
Yeah, it's true. And I've tried, I've gone to meetings with priests and ministers and things one time in Salem we did. And they didn't get it. They still didn't get it. And one backed out because they didn't want to be in the room with a witch, But the others were gentle and understanding to a point, but not to a point to really know what we actually are. And we're not a threat. We're the opposite. We're helping the world to gain its power back. And that's what we need. We need healing. Heaven knows everybody I know has something in their DNA that isn't right, and it's making us ill.
Not me.
No, of course not.
I on Halloween night, we do our circle to honor the people who have passed on. And it's really not just for witches. We have people of all stripes that are grieving someone that, want to show up and make a connection. We have it must have been almost 1,500 people. And we had a religious group show up, and they had a giant cross that, could have fallen on someone. And these, these preachers from San Diego, one of whom had pictures online holding what he called the AK-47 of love. And I'm thinking, well, this is who was showing up, and they actually came into the circle. And the police had taken them out when they tried to come in the circle the year before, the police took them out. This year they didn't. And it wasn't that the police were on their side, but because these religious people tend to sue police if they try to restrict them, they'll claim the Christians are persecuted. Well, so they allowed this group to come into the circle. And then the police surrounded them. So I must have had 36 people come up to me before they left and say, why are the police on their side and not ours? And I spoke to the chief of police and the mayor, and I said, your problem here is this. I said, you don't understand what witches are. And if you understand anything, just understand this. There's inside the circle and there's outside the circle. Don't let people in. You don't need to know everything about what witches believe and do, but if you understand the respect of our space.
It's like if you went into a church and got up on the pulpit and brought...
Right.
I don't know.
Well, I did get I love this chief of police. I got a profuse apology. That's not something any of us would have gotten 20 years ago.
No, he's fine.
And, never 20 years ago would we have gotten this. But, or the, call from the mayor, or, people trying to at least see. The chief said, I know that this is your temple, because it's a park and it's nature. And I said, well, I think my husband would prefer a big marble, temple in the center of the downtown. But, it was encouraging to me to see that these powers that be that were so, in my opinion, awful to you 40, 50 years ago, to all of us.
Exactly.
They didn't want to understand us. And I think I don't think I would be in a place where I'd be getting an apology from the chief of police had you not been here all these decades continuing to do what you do.
Well, yeah, and I've worked with the police, did in the past. I don't do that type of work any longer. I'm still teaching, however, with a lot of help.
Take her class.
With a lot of help. But I'm happy we had this chat, and I think we might do it more often, and it helps people who are watching us start to understand who they are if they're practicing some type of witchcraft. I know there are a lot of people out there that they get a certificate from Alexandrian, the Cabot tradition, this tradition. How can you practice and honor all those, it's like putting a lot of badges on your shoulder. It's not a good thing. And you need to stick to one method.
Well, like you said, we do borrow. But this is something I want to clarify too, because, there is as long as we're respecting it, you might borrow a little of this or a little of that, but your core, I will always use what I learned from you, even as an Alexandrian priest.
Absolutely.
But there's so much, there's only so much I can say as oath-bound, but there are so many parallels in terms of the Hermetic work that you do.
Absolutely.
And what we do that I don't see in some of the Gardnerian or other occult, and so it's really what I learned from you really has empowered my work in the circle in so many ways. But I couldn't be out there and, I'm a Mason and I'm in 6 different traditions of witchcraft. I'm also Voodoo, Palo Mayombe, and Santeria. And it's like, at what point, just first of all, never mind the dilution of practice, but think about the gods or the spirits. Imagine being Isis. I'm glad you could pencil me in for 5 minutes. You know what I mean? Like, you are. Oh, could you imagine going to a Catholic church and having the priest on Sunday say, "Be sure to see me at the temple where I'm rabbi on Saturday"? You couldn't imagine that. It would be ludicrous. But it's just as ludicrous. It's one thing to learn different occult and magical techniques that other cultures.
You need to know those. I know about Christianity. I know about a lot of these other religions, and they have a right to do what they do. I have no reason to not, I'm not going to do anything against them. It doesn't make sense, but I follow my way, in our way. And our ancestors.
But sometimes you find, I don't know. I don't like smudge sticks, for example. I hate the smell of sage. But if I find something that works in a tradition, as long as I'm not exploiting...
Well, as long as you're not breaking the laws of witchcraft.
Or exploiting these other people's...
Wait.
Because I don't really believe in, there's a lot of arguments that you shouldn't culturally appropriate spirituality. Well, I think we've all been scavengers in religion over the decades and the century. We all absorb, the Celts traveled in so many places that they've absorbed many cultural things, but it is done in a way that assimilates it respectfully.
Well, you know that witchcraft is Indo-European only. The word witchcraft doesn't apply to Africa, the Eurasia, or...
Really doesn't even apply to Italy, if you really think about it. The word is Anglo-Saxon.
Exactly. And it doesn't apply... The type of magic that we do is nothing like the Eurasia or voodoo or ceremonial magic. There's similarities in all these, but... ours is the only one that is the law that you do not do harm to anyone in any way. And we have the method to do that. We have a method to neutralize harm and enemies and put a shield around us, our home, and our people, and our animals. So we don't go to war.
So I want to ask you as a final question, if you could see one thing come from the legacy of your work, your life's work as a witch, what would that be?
That the science be connected to witchcraft in a way that helps the general public around the world learn how to use their brain and their mind to better the world. That's important, and they can do it. We can stop the global warming. We can stop all these things if everyone...
We need to. I mean, we're a decade away from...
being fried.
I mean, I don't think we have a choice anymore, but, witchcraft teaches us to take part in our creation. Well, we've got a lot to create here.
Absolutely.
Well, I want to thank you.
I want to thank you. This has been fun. I love being with you. And I hope people gain some understanding from what we've had to say. Otherwise I would never do this, unless you are, equal. You know how to speak about it, and you know what it is. And that's what people need to know about you. And they need to know this about witchcraft. It's very important, I think, what we've had to say tonight.
Well, I think something we both have in common is that no matter how many naysayers we've had or people that have misunderstood who we are, what we do, why we do it, I remember in Joan Rivers' documentary when they asked her, is Melissa going to be a comedian too? And she said, you don't become a comedian. This is like being a nun. You don't have a choice. It's a calling. We do what we do, both of us,
Yes,
because
it's a calling.
Because there's nothing else. You're 91. This is not just her for this camera. This is Laurie every day, living this truth and this mission every single day.
Absolutely.
And when people, I think the two questions I get the most on social media: why doesn't my magic work? And the other one is, how do you keep doing what you do in the face of haters if people don't like that? And the answer is the same, because when you know who you are, why you're here, what you are meant to do, and you inspire that, because I do. I sometimes get hurt by it all. I'm not as steel as you, but what keeps me inspired is you, that you never lose sight. This is my mission. This is why I'm here. So no matter what you put out there about me, no matter how many negative things you say or how many lies you tell,
doesn't matter.
I know that I'm here for a reason, to keep doing this education. It's why I bought the second house. It's why
you did all you've done for Salem.
I want to live up.
And now you're doing it for New Orleans.
But I want to live up to even a fraction of what you've done.
I think you're doing
And
it.
I just, if I can do that, I feel like, I've done some work.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
I love you.
Love you too. Mwah.